We've all seen the images of fairies with wings, so it might surprise you to hear that until the 20th century, those who described their encounters with fairies never included wings in their descriptions of them. Fairies could fly. As Kirk says, they often swam near the earth. Briggs states that it is very rare in traditional fairy tales for fairies to travel by means of wings. They generally fly through the air on transformed ragwort stems, twigs, or bundles of grasses, using them as witches use brooms. Yet, as with all fairy magic, fairy flight seems to be limited by function. For while fairies would fly as a form of play, to steal from humans, to move about quickly, to shoot curses at people, etc., they didn't seem to do so as a means of escaping humans who were seeking to capture them. This might be because humans have the ability to thwart fairy spells. Stare blinking at a fairy in a folktale, and they can't vanish, for example. That said, there is a story where fairies help a human to escape death by flying him away. In this story, a boy is in the wilderness when he comes across a cottage with a lady who allows him to stay the night. During the night, the ladies of this house show their fairy nature by donning caps and saying, "Here's off," at which point they fly away. Afraid to stay in the hut alone, the boy grabs another cap and says, "Here's after," at which point he flies to where the women are dancing around a fairy ring. Then they all fly off again, this time down the chimney of a wealthy man into his cellar, where the boy drinks so much wine he passes out. He is caught and is set to be hung for theft. But just before he is, the fairy lady comes to him and puts a hat on his head, and they fly away. Briggs believes this story has much in common with witches' tales. Fairies, after all, were often responsible for witch flights. As Wilby says, several contemporary anecdotes relate how ordinary people could find themselves transported in fairy whirlwinds. Regardless of the means of flight, however, what we see is that in most cases, fairy flight is clearly a spell. This still leaves the question of where fairy wings come from. Fairies first began to be depicted with wings in 17th century masque plays for the wealthy. These plays were filled with spectacle and fancies, and it is in whimsical drawings of their costumes that we get our first look at fairies with wings. There is one theory that fairies were depicted this way because of a conflation with air elementals known as sylphs, written about by a 16th century German alchemist. Sylphs did indeed become popular in plays, however, most of their depictions are after this point. I would tend to think that designers added the wings more as a form of symbolism and as a way of taking artistic license, as they so often do. Regardless, theatrical fairies grew in popularity, and so they influenced pop depictions of fairies. Even so, people seem to have been able to tell the difference for some time, as again, fairies weren't mentioned as having wings in encounters for another 300 years.